Hey guys, it's Stephen here live with another video. And I'm tired. That's the world's worst intro. Hey Stephen, oh my god, I just said hey Stephen to a random bunch of people. Hey guys, it's Stephen here back with another video. If you're watching this, you've just missed the edited version of that intro, which was absolutely terrible. I thought I'd go live today. Now we've all sort of got over the sleep deprivation, apparently, so apparently not for me. After City's exit against Al Hilal in the Club World Cup, a 4-3 loss in the early hours of the morning, which was a very interesting game of football, which has caused an awful lot of head loss online, as per usual. And lots of narratives have come out from that game. And I myself actually have a little bit of slight confession. In the early hours, not really thinking very clearly and with context and fair, said I thought like Dias was struggling in a Highline. And I didn't really think a day or two later that I'd slept on it, that I'd given really a fair crack of the whip there, given that he's very obviously been a part of it during success in the past. And I saw some tweets from Bailey, which on Sky Blue Times. I presume it's from you, by the way. I presume you run it. Yeah. I've never actually double checked that about the Highline and so on. I thought it'd be a good idea to chat about it today. So, firstly, Bailey, welcome to the channel, mate. How are you doing? You all right?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thank you for the opportunity to invite me on. And yeah, as you mentioned and we spoke about before we started, it's nice to be in a better mood than most people are online at the moment, really, isn't it?
That's just the internet, mate. It could have won 5-0, so people would moan. That happens anyway. They'll be moaning about who didn't get on off the bench or something like that. But so basically, Bailey runs Sky Blue Times, which is sort of a tactical analysis and sort of analytical breakdown of Manchester City Football Club. Is that a decent way to describe what you do over there at Sky Blue Times?
Yeah, pretty much. I just wanted to put content out rather than just consume it all the time. So I just wanted to be more involved and then just started doing that as kind of evolved bit by bit. So as you mentioned there, do a lot of stuff tactical wise, watching, analysing things, looking at data. So yeah, anything from players to the team to just general things that I kind of notice in a game I think are interesting and worth talking about.
So there should be a link in the description to Bailey's channel. You've recently started a YouTube channel as well, haven't you? Called Sky Blue Times.
Yeah, last week. Yeah.
How's it going, man? Enjoying it?
Yeah, no, it's all right. I did done 5 videos last week. I've got another 4 or 5 lined up this week that I've got in mind to do, and then yeah, just enjoy. It's quite different from because I do a lot of writing with the newsletter. Yeah, it's just a different medium, but so it'd be interesting to try both those things out, and then see which how successful one could be over the other, and then the kind of different things that you can kind of bring to each one, because you can just explain things in a different way in both mediums, can't you?
And you've already touched your feet in the water in terms of being online anyway, because you've done obviously the 9320 stuff quite regularly, haven't you, as well? So it's a natural progression. And I thought, to be honest, mate, you should be a good, first time on the channel, and also a good man to talk about it, because I was reading your thread about, and I actually saw the tweet you did about the average distance in terms of the defending for the Highline and so on. But we'll start in general with a very simple question to you. The title of the video: do Man City have a Highline problem? It's a very loaded question, that, given the game. It's not loaded. I guess it's a complicated question. Do we have a Highline problem?
No, so not for a Highline, no. I think we have a problem with our possession structure, and we have a problem with the relationships between players within that structure that we'll eventually get onto. And I think people saw a lot, particularly down the left-hand side, the relationship between all the players down there and understanding whose job is what. Who needs to cover what? If the press is broken, how do we adjust that? That's what we really lack. But we will always play with a high line. That's been that way throughout the whole time that Guardiola has coached Manchester City. I expect that to stay the same. And yeah. So much more about how they set up out of possession.
So I read your tweet on Sky Blue Times where you did some research into the defensive line and the average distance from a team's own goal to where defensive actions take place. Essentially, how many meters from their own goal to defensive actions. From 2021, the season 2021 through to this to 24-25. And it looks like basically the Highline hasn't really changed at all, roughly around 51 meters per season. The Highline seems to basically be in the exact same place for the last 4 or 5 seasons, So we've been pretty consistent on that part, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you listen to any Guardiola's press conference, he'll talk about wanting to squeeze the team up the pitch and take away their space and really have control higher up the pitch. And a lot of that is kind of because it's an average across the season. So I'd bear in mind there are a lot of teams we come up against that will play low blocks that just naturally will force you to have to play a high line because you're just going to be positioned higher up the pitch all the time. And there will be teams that will want to press you, as we've seen with the likes of Arsenal and Liverpool. But there's a lot of teams that you get the ball on the halfway line, and they'll go in their box nicely for you and pack up. So you will just naturally always be positioned high against a lot of teams in the Premier League.
And so it's basically consistent, like the way that City played for the past few years, of course, during the 4 leagues in a row and the treble season, City played a high line. And Ruben Dias has been a big part of that. And now Dias, I've seen a lot of narrative going around. I fed into it unintentionally, to be honest. I sort of backtracked about that online, about him struggling with pace. And I think it's fair to say if you watch the games in isolation and remove the causes of the moment and so on, there's a lot of Dias running back towards his own goal and he doesn't look the most comfortable there. What do you think the biggest difference is between Dias running back to his own goal recently and maybe 3 years ago? Like, why does it feel like he's more comfortable now, even if he necessarily isn't, if that makes sense?
So I'd say if there was one thing from the Club World Cup and particularly last season, then I would look further forward and look at the pressure on the ball. So if the likes of Doku, Grealish playing left wing are then not applying enough pressure on that centre back that's on the ball that's got the time and space, they can pick out that pass really easily. And then the forward that Dias is then having to track is able to get the jump on him. So that would be like one thing where you're just putting him in more and more situations where he's in a foot race 1v1 and he's more likely to lose. And then that just is going to expose the fact that that's not his best attribute. So forwards will pull onto his side, and then because they're given like the defenders and the deeper midfielders more time to pick up those passes, you're just seeing more and more of Dias in those situations. So that would be like the one kind of thing I would say.
Is there anything in the fact that teams have just got better at this in full stop, or is it entirely down? Not entirely down. It's always a mixture. But would you put more weight in the fact that City have got worse at the counter press, being a bigger cause? The fact that, because I feel like the Premier League, and this is the two things can be true at the same time. I'm aware of this, but to me it feels like the Premier League has just got a lot better in terms of, like, you look at mid-table teams or lower teams, they've all got a Hooson who can ping the ball to Semenyo out wide with loads of pace, or they've got a Morgan Gibbs White who can hit an Alanga. Like, I know they're sort of better teams, but it feels like everyone's got a very willing, capable runner. You got West Ham struggling, still got Kudus. Kudus you can hit, with pace or Bowen or whatever. It feels like there's an awful lot of competency out wide in the Premier League these days, and there always has been to an extent, but more than ever, it feels like teams are fitter, more physical. And, you've got teams like Wolves who are struggling. You've got cracking wingers who can beat you and whatever. And do you think there's anything in that teams have got better at hitting the channels as a counter as a natural result to, teams like Man City and even Arsenal and so on? There's so many more teams these days, control possession an awful lot more. Has there been anything in teams getting better at dealing with that and hitting the wingers a lot more, who are a lot more physical, a lot faster? Do you think the counter press being at its peak can still deal with that, or has it just got harder?
So the Premier League is definitively the mid-table clubs have gotten better, as you mentioned there. Guardiola mentioned it several times across last season that the quality of these teams is much higher. So you're just in for a much tougher fight when you're going to go to the likes of Brighton and Bournemouth that can come and play against you if you're not at your very best on that day. So that's absolutely one thing. But from the City point of view, like, apart from the treble season, I think after that, you're looking at a team that is declining out of possession. So even when we won the 4 in a row, that was a team that was dropping its level. And I would say Arsenal definitively that season were the best team, arguably in the world, out of possession, but they were comfortably ahead of City, I would say, out of possession terms. So we've already seen that slow decline. And when you're looking at the midfield and you're looking at the players there, like City in 21-22 would have had a midfield of Bernardo, Gundogan and Rodri. There was an incredible midfield and they were incredibly good out of possession. But you just looked at the game recently against Al Hilal, and you're seeing a similar midfield three when Rodri did come on. But you can already see the difference that they've just really quite declined physically. So yeah, I think it's coupled with those two things. Obviously, these teams are better. You can't escape that. But it's not like this Liverpool team we saw won the Premier League was something outstanding on and off the ball either that was needed to be able to get around these teams. I think the level has just dropped that significantly from City, and they've just got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Are there any Did you see any signs of that improving during the Club World Cup? And obviously, there's a lot of changes, and Guardiola's been very enthusiastic about the energy that Linders and Colo Torre, James French have brought, and of course, at Juventus, it felt quite great fun to watch. Have you noticed any personal, any progress on that regard?
I'd say the Juventus game is the kind of real standout of that, particularly with the way that City were counter pressing and was quite aggressive and nice. I think the first half against Al Hilal, you saw a good amount of that too. So yeah, there are a lot of stuff there, but you're talking about really good relationships between players, and that's just not going to happen if you're not going to play week in, week out and build those sort of relationships. So if you're talking about the likes of Aït-Nouri and Jeremy Doku, how many games have they played together week in, week out? They haven't. So you're still getting used to that relationship. Guardiola having to move across the cover when Aït-Nouri needs to jump forward. That's a relationship that needs building. Guardiola's barely played any minutes in that tournament. And then it got exposed in the game against Al Hilal. So I think there's a lot of that. Obviously, I think Rodri is the obvious impact that we saw in this tournament. Whenever he did play, you did see the impact in the way that he would organise the press and make sure players are in the right position. And then on top of that, I would look at like Nico G. I'd expect to play more minutes eventually. You need a player similar to Rodri that's just a lot more organised and smells the danger a lot better. And then eventually moving the likes of Reinders to play more as an 8. You're then moving out players like Gundogan from the lineup that just ain't able to kind of cover enough ground, switch on, win the duels competitively. Like he's just behind on that margin. So yeah, there's still plenty of work to do, but I think a lot of it is just going to be the wrong personnel coming out for the new guys coming in, and then the relationships that the team can build across it.
So let's go through the goals against Al Hilal, because obviously you talked about the goals. I've got your notes up on Sky Blue Times here when you've gone through each of the goals. So obviously this is the one where Ederson sort of parries it back into the box, and the guy ends up heading it in and so on. What goes wrong there in this goal? I know it's quite a lot to break down, but way before Ederson weakly parries it back into, if you're looking at it from your tactical eye and so on, where's the issue further up the pitch?
Yeah, so if you roll back to the start when you see City go out to press, Al Hilal moved the ball across their entire back line, really spread out, so the distances are quite big for City to cover. And we've seen in moments...
Just a quick interjection, by the way, guys. If you go on the Sky Blue Times Twitter, the Sky Blue Times, you'll see a breakdown of each of those goals individually. So if you're watching back, you can have a reference point visually, which is, with diagrams and so on. I can't do it on here right now. I'm so sorry, guys. But you guys... Oh, but no, maybe I'll be able to. 1 second. Let me see if I can do. Let me just quick see if I can do. Can I do it? Sorry to interrupt you, mate. I just thought it'd be a good idea to try. Can I do this? Hang on. I can do. There we go. Perfect. There we go, mate.
Yeah, there we go.
As you were saying.
Yeah, so they spread the distance really wide, Al Hilal, and you can see them bring the ball back, move it across their back line. City come out to press. Obviously, Highline coming across centre back, Doku coming across to the full back. And what you saw in the second half is Cancelo would position himself deeper on purpose, because that made Aït-Nouri have a decision to make. So if he wanted to press and get higher up to cover, which we'll see later on in the match, he has a big decision to make. So at the moment, it's Jeremy Doku coming over to Cancelo over on this one. So Doku comes over. Cancelo goes to make the pass, fakes it. So Doku's already arrived. And then the winger drops after that. Aït-Nouri goes with him, and he goes too tight on the inside. So it's just dead easy for them to turn and spin. So that's just a genuine mistake from Aït-Nouri. Guardiola's already moved across anyway to be able to cover. And then if you see the fullback Cancelo that Doku was with, he just doesn't follow him when he goes to overlap. So Doku's coming back here behind. Gundogan's come over to make an attempt to win the ball, doesn't win the ball. And then all of them can just continue on. So you've got overlap and fullback. You've got the winger there that's gone past Gundogan. Aït-Nouri's behind, and you've only really got Guardiola there to cover the space.
So you've immediately messed up there when Aït-Nouri's got span far too easily. Doku hasn't tracked the overlapping fullback, and Gundogan has failed in his challenge, essentially. Is that a decent summation of it?
Yeah. So you've just seen the knock-on effect of, as soon as Aït-Nouri's made a mistake, Doku's not tracked back, Gundogan's tried to help out, can't help out, and then suddenly you're in a really poor position then.
And then obviously Diaz comes over. From that point there is obviously a mistake, isn't there? So there we go. So you put Guardiola tries to press the ball carrier, but there's the overlap down there. Of course, the cross comes in. At that point there, looking at in the centre there, it's a bit.
And you can see in there, Doku makes no attempt to cover that guy. Ayanori is trying to go on the ball carrier. Guardiola's stood off as well. So instead of Guardiola picking up the ball carrier and then Ayanori going over to close down Cancelo on the overlap, or Doku come back to support, they're all stuck inside. So then easy to put that across there. Diaz tracks actually really well. I think in this goal, he's kind of been undersold from his criticism online as he tracks the near post run. Ellison obviously parries and it hits Diaz directly. And then the guy back heels it to his teammate behind who takes a shot, which Diaz blocks. So Diaz still makes a really important block there.
Yeah.
But then obviously the ball comes up. Nunes is just watching and is not able to put him off. But across that goal, that's several players. That's not one player that needs to get out of the club, so to speak, or replace one player with one transfer. You've got really poor mistakes all the way across the team that you'd expect better from.
So back to the very start of it, what is the press trigger wrong right there or anything like that? Like looking back at here at the very start, should they be tighter or is it the fact that? Is it the fact that Nori sort of is Dokuay should be there in your theory, in your opinion?
No, he's fine. Cancelo does well to fake the shot and then goes to make the pass. But the point is that when Nori,
go for it, as you say,
yeah, because when the pass comes across to Cancelo, he fakes the initial pass. Doku comes over to press, and then he makes a pass afterwards to the winger down the line. But it all falls apart because Nori gets beaten on the inside, and it's just really poor to be beaten that way. And then after that,
unfortunately,
and then after that, it's just a knock on. So Gundogan has to come over. You've got somebody that's just not as good in midfield, winning the ball coming across,
and he's not getting back, is he? Either Gundogan,
no.
To be honest.
And then Doku then doesn't come back. Ayanori makes the wrong decision to kind of follow the guy inside, and then it all kind of like just goes on one by one.
So this is a screen. Is Ayanori trying to get ahead and win the ball there? Because I can't remember it in full motion. Is he trying to nick the ball?
Yeah, so the winger drops to receive the pass. Ayanori goes with him, but because he goes with him on the inside really tight, he's just so easy to kind of turn off him. Yeah.
So as you see there, essentially, that was Diaz did well there. Essentially, he did the best he could do in a very tricky situation. I mean, there's mistakes, of course, there from a few players. I mean, we'll go on to the second goal. Where is your second one? 2-1. So, do you want to talk us through this one? And by the way, tell me when you want to slide down to the. Oh, it's just that one set of images for this one, isn't it?
Yeah. Just that one. So we have our corner that comes in. Al Hilal head it away, which is where the first one starts. So Reinders is there, heads it back in. That's a poor one in my opinion because you're not really going towards all the City centre backs that are actually to his right hand side. So there's not really anybody there to be able to win the ball. Cancelo does well, switched on, goes to it, drives into space away from Gundogan. Again, if you had another player there that's more physical capable, they should be able to at least put a little bit more pressure on Cancelo. Cancelo drives into that space, then he hits the pass. And when you watch it back, I think it's really important just to watch specifically Ayanori and Reinders. Reinders is trying to look to see if he can intercept that pass, so he's not tracking the guy behind him, and he's not in a good position to sprint. And then Ayanori is just jogging. At the same time, Malcolm is. He's full sprint before the other two even start to sprint themselves. So they're just never going to get near him.
It's an absurd pass what it's worth, and the ground Malcolm makes up is ridiculous. When you look at this, the first two, you'd think it'd be reasonably under control, wouldn't you? From there, and then of course the pass from Cancelo, it's the lack of reaction time, really, isn't it? As well, from a few people there in particular. Nori's not covering himself in glory, unfortunately, defensively for both of these goals so far. And then obviously Malcolm has the pace, and it's a really good finish, which is. I mean, that Cancelo's pass for what it's worth. Outside his boot and beautiful pass, wasn't it?
But Reinders could have headed it across the Gundogan. He could have tried to tap it down to Ayanori behind him. He could have headed it towards all the City centre backs who are on the right side of the box. He had other options, and as we mentioned with the first goal, it all kind of then falls apart off that.
Yeah. Onto the third goal, which is delivering to the 6-yard box. Koulibaly, do you want to talk us through this one?
Yeah. So really, it looks really simple on the face of it because it's just an Al Hilal corner that Koulibaly is able to win. But if you go back to the start and you see more on the video than I've got on the pictures here, Koulibaly is actually alongside Nathan Ake. Diaz is by himself. He leaves Ake, goes to Diaz. He gives him a slight push on the back, which means Diaz stumbles forward, then can't get his jump at the right time. And then he's able to beat him. And Ake doesn't react and go with him. And Ederson at the same time steps out to go collect the ball, sees Koulibaly come across. Then he hesitates, goes back, and he's then not on his line to be able to make a good reaction save either.
Yeah.
So it's just those like little details. I think this is the kind of goal I don't think you can complain too much about across that game, because these things can just happen in every single game, can't they? They're just kind of little
I'm a
details.
firm believer sometimes that is, when it comes to crosses and headers, you cannot literally be on every point of the pitch at any moment. If a cross goes 1 yard deeper than you and you're touch tight and you still got your hand on your man, there's not really much more. Sometimes I think Ederson there, I do think Ederson, I felt the same. Like he steps forward and he doesn't plan himself particularly well to make that reaction quick save, doesn't he? It ends up being a bit flat-footed, basically. Which is not particularly great. I think in general, like, you know, players get between defenders sometimes and they win the header because they are 6'4" and they are strong and they are very fucking good at heading the ball too. So I think there's an element of that. And obviously it doesn't really touch on the issues of this video anyway. Final goal, 4-3.
Oh, sorry. Can I just say before we do the final goal, the aerial duel thing in particular, if you look back at the last couple of seasons, we've lost. So Ake is generally quite good in the air. When I was looking at his stats from the last 3 seasons, from the treble season and then 23-24, he's above 60%. He drops to 56 last season, but that was when you were losing him due to fitness and he played very few minutes. So you're losing one guy that's generally good in the air there. You've lost Stones, who across any season he's played, I think, like at least 20 starts in the Premier League. He will get 65+% aerial duel win percentage. He's arguably our best defender in the air, I would say. And then if you look at Akanji's last 3 seasons, I think he's 40%, 50%, 47%, so generally quite poor. That explains why he's played right back and played his best football at right back in the treble season. And then Diaz was actually, you think, so his first season he was 61% for City, treble season 61, and then the last 2 it's been 52 and 52. So he's dropped.
What'd you put it down to?
It's a tough one. I don't think he's ever been necessarily dominant in the air. I think in corners he's had a lot of good moments, but he doesn't direct them very well. But for me, the standout thing he's gotten worse at is when he's 1v1 with a striker. He seems to lose that battle a lot. So if he comes out of that battle in a good way, it's because he's put the striker off rather than he's won the ball, if that makes sense.
He was brilliant at that when he first joined, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was very good at it, like an absolute beast.
Yeah.
You felt like watching Vincent Kompany, you know, early on. Like, it doesn't feel, I don't know. It's like I'm not a number stats guy in the way that you are, but it's interesting to hear that. And it does feel like it has dropped in that way, in terms of, like, you used to trust Diaz to essentially monster his opponent, and it doesn't feel that way anymore. Out of curiosity, because obviously I'm sure you've got the numbers. How do you know? Obviously limited for Vitor Reis, but how do Reis and Kusanov compare to those? You know,
no, I've got him here because that was on my mind to go to straight away. So Vitor Reis with Palmeiras, 65.7 in his first season, and as we've seen in the tournament, he is playing against big men. I'll just do the others and then you can go. So Kusanov at Lens last season, 69.2. And then Barr, he's just a freak at this. So when he was in the Liga, he was 70.5% win percentage. And then when he was the second half of the season at Lens, he was 79.3%. So
what's the significance for aerial duels for a team like Manchester City, for example? Because I know that's a very basic question, but people win headers, sometimes people don't. Why is it particularly important for Man City? Why does it affect us so much when we seem to not?
Yeah, so it's a very important thing specifically for City, specifically for Guardiola, because to control the long balls, to control these duels, and then the second balls that Guardiola's on about, is to control the transition. So when you're watching back the match against Al Hilal, if City are losing that long ball, and then Al Hilal are then able to then pick up the ball higher up the pitch, they've then now got time and space to run at City. Whereas if you're dominating the long ball and you're winning that header initially, you're stopping them from bringing the ball down to feet and be able to play those transition moments. And we've just seen more and more and more of that. And I've just got here, just I thought this was kind of similar to what we saw in the game against Al Hilal. This was after the Bournemouth away game last season. And although there was obviously a lot of stuff, because Guardiola talked about the kind of work effort and losing the heart and soul. But in that, when they asked him about transitions, he said, they are fast, but today they more than often our play was not clean, especially these type of balls when you do not win it. The transitions didn't happen much, but it was more that when we made high pressing, when we forced them long, the long balls we lose the ball, we lose the second ball, and then after that they run. In the past, we can handle these situations. Today, we could not handle it. It was one or two actions in the build-up for them on the left side, and after that, we lost the long ball, we lose the ball, and they can run at us. So that was last season, and you can see that same problem there.
Yeah, he's very aware of it, and you're right. It seems to be that way. Interesting, by the way, in terms of it. Just going back to the headers, and we'll go back to that point in a second. It does feel like to me, Vitor Reis is actually genuinely good in the air. Basically just watching it and reading the basic stats in terms of winning his headers and so on. And Kusanov seems to have quite a leap. He's got a lot of spring for a guy who's not the biggest for a centre back. Be interesting to see how they sort of develop it in time. Obviously, Bar is just a freak that way, and there's no worries about his physicality. Was there any? Basically, a lot of people said, and I want to know your sort of opinion on this in the second half, because I know how I feel. People go, "Well, why didn't you make any attempt to fix that in the second half?" Guardiola doesn't tend to fix things visibly, directly, in terms of like, "Oh, we're getting done over top." He'll try and fix it further up the pitch, won't he? In terms of like, tactical changes higher up by sorting the press, which isn't always visible to us as a fan immediately. If that makes sense, so we still, but it doesn't mean he hasn't tried. Did City make any attempt to, or did Guardiola make any tweaks to stem the sort of tide in that second half? Because it felt to me after about the first 15-20 minutes we did sort of get a reasonable back of control again. Obviously it didn't end up positive in the end, but it felt like from 70 minutes onwards towards the end we did sort of stem the tide a little bit. Was there any changes that you noticed?
Yeah, it would have been a 53-minute sub, so he brings on, I believe it was Ake and Akanji, brings on Rodri, and that was the one that kind of wrestled City back more of control. But I think it kind of sacrificed a little bit in terms of the fluidity that we did have when we were attacking, particularly the kind of like spaces in and around the fullbacks. But you bring on there two players that, at least from what we've seen from their City career in Ake and Akanji, two players that should defend channels very, very well. And then we saw then towards the end of that second half that they did struggle with that. And obviously baked within that is that I'd assume Guardiola, they had an issue, like, because he had his injury, doesn't he? So
yeah,
I'm not sure whether he had to come off. I believe he had a yellow card, so and Nunes had a yellow card as well. So that was probably a bit of an issue there that they were considering. And then obviously Rodri then eventually does have to come off. So then ideally you would have kept him on if you could have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree. They did wrestle back control to a degree. It wasn't as bad because that first kind of 15 minutes felt like we were just getting got at all the time. And I believe in his press conference after the match, he said he thought in his starting 11, he thought that Al Hilal were going to press us high up the pitch. So his initial selection wasn't based on this is the best team to deal with transitions.
Yeah, we'll find anyway for large parts of it until obviously it fell through. Let's go for the last goal. So do you want to talk us through this one, mate? The 4-3?
Yeah, so I think this touch on everything that we've discussed across the video, really. So
yeah,
Al Hilal make the throw in. You can see Ake actually, when you watch it back, is going to go to try win that duel and then doesn't. He hesitates. Foden's obviously not going to win that. So he's able to then knock it down to his teammate there. You've got Bernardo and Shirky, both aren't picking any of the players up. So you've got the spare man Neves at the back. And then they find Neves, and Neves just immediately pings the ball out to the left side.
Who should be out there based on the current setup at that point?
Who's on the far side?
Yeah.
Guy on the far side. So this is what I was going to get to. Savinho notices that this guy's free, goes in, and then because he goes in, he's got too much of a distance to cover. So Akanji is the right back that shifts across. And as you see on here, Akanji, there's two guys there. Akanji can't go too high. He can't apply that much pressure because there's two players there. And then because Savinho's had to come inside and then can't get across, it's easy for them to pick out that cross. You see Dias is the guy behind Akanji who goes in to try and defend a near post if they run down the line to the overlapper. Bernardo fills in the middle, picking up the guy in the middle there. And then you've got Ake and Aitanor. And I think this was a bit of an issue here. So they tried to pick up both guys at the back post. But in doing so, Ake misjudges it leaves the guy in the middle free, which is Milinkovic-Savic, and then
Yeah.
Aitonori's in no man's land because the cross isn't coming to the guy at the back post, but he's not trying to win the duel off Savic. So yeah, easy for him to win the header. Edison makes a very good save, and then obviously Bernardo's not followed the guy all the way through. That gets to tap it in. But again, that's all come from, you think if Ake was really confident and was just like, I'm going to win that header right away at the very start, he could have stepped out, win that ball, headed it back, and then this situation doesn't happen. But he doesn't. And then you've got the three midfielders that just don't pick up anybody. So it's dead easy for Al Hilal to pick up the spare man in Neves at the back. He makes a really good pass because he just plays it first time, pings it over. And then, Akanji's kind of stuck there. He can't apply enough pressure. So it just all falls on from one thing to the next.
So that bottom slide there, when he pings that wide, Savinho's not in shot yet, is he? Is he? Is he tucked inside?
He is next to Cherky.
Okay.
Right next. Yeah,
they've tucked right in, haven't they? Got drawn right in.
Yeah, because he spots the guy not picked up. Because as I mentioned, the three midfielders don't pick any of them up. He spots it.
So Savinho's trying his best actually to come in and help out, but actually where it means the more free on the other side, because one of the midfielders, central midfielders, haven't noticed it. Where Savinho in his blessed heart has tried his best to sort of cover, but then actually obviously left us open. But it's not really Savinho's fault, really, is it?
No, the intent's right, and he's definitely a player you can see in the games. He smells the right things, and if he does try and do the right action in a lot of it. But yeah, because he's done that, he's then a certain distance closer to everything going on. He's just not going to be able to support Akanji in time because they play the cross right away. So yeah.
Is that Cherky and Bernardo there who are wrong side in the second side?
Cherky, Bernardo, and then Foden, the three, and then Savinho's the one that's moved across.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the middle.
I mean, get a follow all, and it's as you said. I mean, can Ake win that? Do you think? Because obviously I can't tell off the screenshot, but could he have won that header if he'd have committed to it? Do you think?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, he could have come over the back of him and tried to win it. But he steps and then he hesitates and then drops back. But he hasn't got a guy to pick up, so he could have come over the back of him and tried to win that.
Do you think he thinks maybe it's not the most dangerous thing in the world because from that point you can't really achieve much? And I don't know. I'm trying to think what was going through his head there. I mean, would Guardiola wanted him to come through him? Do you think?
It just felt to me, his performance in particular, Ake, was somebody that was quite hesitant on what to do. So we saw that with a goal in the corner, and then we've seen this here. We see it in other moments. I think he only won 1 of 6 aerial duels, so he wasn't somebody that was kind of really willing and decisive as he normally is. And I think that just kind of ties into what the kind of more general conversation about the team heading into summer is.
So obviously, it sounds like a lot of these things essentially, and I might be sort of maybe making a naive conclusion, but it comes down to a lot of individual mistakes, a lot of a lack of assertiveness. People not taking responsibility in certain individual moments, winning your own individual battles essentially, and the basics, to quote Fabian Delph, when the ball gets your man. And it does feel to me when I think about, say, the treble season, the one thing that stands out to me about that City side, and you talk about that Arsenal side a couple of years ago as well, they were very good at that as well. They were physical monsters. They sort of won every battle individually, constantly, and it felt like if the ball went out wide to Ake or Akanji or Walker, or then it went through the centre with Dias and Stones, they were winning their headers. They were winning their duels one-on-one constantly. Then, of course, you had the smarts of Pica, Bernardo, Gundogan, and Rodri as well. Is it essentially like, and I know obviously it's still very early on in this, is this even the season start? I don't even know. But it's essentially, it feels like you're more assertive, you win your duels, half of these goals at least don't happen. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yeah. A lot of these situations just come down to being switched on, not watching the ball, and being more decisive and strong in those moments. And that's something Guardiola always says, isn't it? In those duels, you do need to be strong and aggressive and assertive. And that's something that they really do lack. And it will be that, and then it will be the fact that there's personnel that are going to change in this team and in this lineup.
And going back to sort of the question at the start, and about City's Highline problem, and do we have one? And obviously we've talked for a decent amount of time now. I'm going to circle back, to the general tournament. Have you seen signs, again, given what we just talked about and all the context of that, of some of these problems potentially being solved?
Yeah, I would say so. If you go through all the games, there are moments where City do counter press well. There are moments where they do press well. There are moments where they force teams to go long and do win those long balls. But against Al Hilal in the second half, it was a second half that they didn't do that very, very well. It's a reminder of those problems that they're not fixed straight away just because you move certain players in or you change the coaching staff. But there are plenty of positives in that regard, in the way that we are pressed across multiple games, just the same as there are improvements in set pieces that we've seen with the way that City do attack, and then we've also seen a goal that we've conceded. So when you do look into them, there are a lot of positives for that to build on, but it's still work to do, both on the pitch and then with the transfers.
And that's what I talk about as well. Like the personnel. Look at the Juventus game, 5-2 there, and largely that's sort of that was the when things were at the best during this tournament. The midfield there, Reinders, Rodri, Bernardo Silva, and then Doku, Savinho, Marmoush. Not a vastly different side to the one against Al Hilal. But what I talked about, obviously, the midfield there, Rodri, Reinders, you presume that's City's absolute gold standard level midfield going ahead, presuming they can stay fit and so on together. What were they, what I guess what I was trying to look at really, because I was looking at the midfield and teams then, is, do you feel like Gundogan and Bernardo, because Bernardo was in that midfield that day, and Bernardo and Gundogan are very different players and probably slightly different. They're different age still as well. Gundogan is a lot younger than Bernardo. Vice versa. Sorry, Bernardo's a lot younger than Gundogan still. But, I guess what I'm trying to get at here is it possible for some of these players, because Guardiola clearly loves, Gundogan still and Bernardo still, can they still work in the style that we want to move towards, in your opinion? Like, because obviously Bernardo played in that game against Juventus, and we were very impressive, and he was a part of that. Can he still press to that same degree that he needs to? And is Gundogan got any potential use in the system, or is it as it left him entirely?
So I'd say Bernardo definitely for next season, and that seems to be the plan. I think he'd be more than fine, and we've seen across the last season that he is a player that is definitely more than capable out of possession to really kind of dig his heels in and work very, very hard. So I think definitely him for next season. He can do it. But I think for Gundogan, you're looking really for his qualities on the ball to justify keeping him rather than off the ball. And then when you're looking at the other players within the team, I feel like he's just becomes a bit redundant if you're looking for somebody in that kind of like fifth, sixth choice as a midfielder, when you're looking at some of the other players that we could either bring in, or you think if Rico Lewis is a midfielder, I'd rather him be the fifth choice guy that still doesn't lose much for me out of possession, but can still bring a lot of qualities on the ball. You know what I mean? I think when you're moving him down the squad, it's not really worth keeping him, I would say.
Yeah, he doesn't feel like he can press very tense. The amount of times you see Gundogan last season trying and just get turned so easily. Like, it's like me when I play five-a-side very rarely. I just could not turn at all, and like that's what it reminds me of. How do you? What I was going to say, I've lost my train of thought there entirely. I was going to say, do you see any potential solutions defensively, like, or do you expect Guardiola will persist with, Aït-Nouri, Vardiol, Diaz, and another out wide throughout this season? Or, because obviously Kanji's still there, Ake's still there. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you think there's potential for this back line, say with Nunez or Rico Lewis, to work as long as, say, Rodri and Reinders and Bernardo are all, committing to the press and so on, and obviously the forward line? Are there any fundamental issues with those particular players that will struggle to put this into action? Because you go back to peak Man City with the treble season, you've got Ake at his very best, playing without injuries, Akanji riding the crest of that wave which he had from after joining Man City, Kyle Walker at his peak as well, and John Stones and Diaz at their peak. Can we still, is there any problems with the defensive players directly, or do you think it's still mainly on the press, if that makes sense? Are there any concerns about the individuals in that defense?
I think the tournament, they'll come away thinking that it's probably worth spending the money on somebody like Livramento. I think that would be one kind of standout thing for me. I think Diaz is in a place where, as much as we've gone through the goals, as you mentioned at the start across the match, there's definitely issues there, isn't there, when we talk about aerial duels and what his best form is like compared to when we're talking about the treble season and this first season, 2021. So I do think there's room for that. I think having Guardiola be a consistent starter, having Aït-Nouri be a consistent starter is going to make a significant difference. But I do think that three of a back line, Aït-Nouri, Guardiola, Dias, we're going to see quite significantly across the season. Ideally, they build good relationships with the rest of the team. And then beyond that, it's about making sure that midfield has either Rodri or Nico is starting in that midfield. And then in your eight, you then got your likes of Reinders and Bernardo, Cherky and Foden. But I think you need to have one of Rodri or Nico in the team for me.
What do you make of Nico Gonzalez's situation, by the way, from your? Because obviously, I guess you dive down to his numbers for City a lot more and so on. Like, where do you stand? Because obviously, there's a lot of anxiety around him already from City fans, given he's not played an awful lot and he seems to be getting not quite the Nunes treatment, but he's definitely getting a slower treatment. It's not the Reinders treatment. He's immediately into the team. He's going to. Though having said that, admittedly, Nico was in the team admittedly straight away, and it's the same equivalent amount of game time after 3 or 4 games that you'd argue. Are you worried about Nico Gonzalez so far, or do you think it's just precautionary with Guardiola, easing him in and so on?
I think it's just going to take time. He's quite particular with what he wants from that position. He is a young player, and I think in the match definitely that we saw in this Club World Cup, you saw a lot of good, but then you did see a guy that was taking on a lot of responsibility playing as that lone six. So I think it's just going to take time for him to do that, to build up Guardiola's trust playing in that position. And he mentioned across last season that he wanted Rodri back so that Nico could see Rodri and learn from seeing him up close.
Yeah.
So I do think we're going to get more of him, but it just won't be a kind of like straight away thing. And then on top of that, I think a few things just depend on outgoings, don't they? So if Gundogan isn't in the squad, if Kovacic isn't in the squad, then just from that alone, you're kind of shifting away the dynamics for players to play more.
Bailey, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. So essentially, the answer to the question is yes and no, as always with these things. We have a problem with how we currently deal with it, but not necessarily it can work. And that seems to be the crux of it. Guys, I know a lot of people just want to go, I saw someone going to say this is all just waffles. We chose the wrong players. I don't think it's always as simple as that. We know great players can play terribly depending on structure, organization, chemistry with and sometimes you can get it right. And as much as we want to pretend it isn't preseason, it's still sort of semi is preseason. These are a lot of new partnerships and a lot of new patterns forming or not formed yet that are going to affect City. Bailey, thank you so much, mate. I've really enjoyed that. I hope you guys have enjoyed it too. Check out where can people find you again? Sorry, Bailey.
Sky Blue Times, either on X, do loads of tweets, and then the YouTube channel that you mentioned at the start. And I also write a newsletter, which you can also find online at the same address.
Essential stuff for City fans, I promise you. There's a link in the description. Go and give Bailey a follow over there. Subscribe to his channel as well. You're on I think it was like around 500 when I looked at 338 subscribers. Let's get Bailey to 1,000. It'd be ace if you can get there very, very soon. And yeah, there's space in the City community for. Like Bailey's better at this tactical stuff than by a long way. So people like Bailey make it a lot easier. People like myself to waffle a lot about football. So thank you very much, Bailey. Massively appreciate it, mate.
Thank you very much for coming on, having me on. It's been a pleasure and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Guys, see you later. Like this video if you want to. Let us know what you make of City's problems or no problems with the Highline. And I'll catch you tomorrow for another video. Bye-bye.